What happens when Montreal's most feared crime lord walks into the one accountant brave enough to tell him his books are wrong? He expected her to apologize. Instead, the quiet, round-faced woman in the corner office made the untouchable Castellan of the Saint Laurent syndicate sit across from her for 3 hours and leave without a single word of argument. The Auberge Noire on Rue Saint-Denis had a particular smell on Friday evenings. Burgundy and cedar, old money pretending to be older, and underneath it all, the specific brand of nervous sweat that clung to men who knew exactly who was dining in the private room at the back. Wren Bassett had worked the books for Auberge Noire for 4 years. She knew its accounting irregularities, the way a doctor knows a patient's bad habits. Intimately, without judgment, and with a quiet certainty that things would eventually go wrong. She was 31, 5'4", with the kind of soft, full figure that made restaurant chairs feel honest and tailored suits feel like a personal insult from the fashion industry. She wore her dark hair pinned back tight and her reading glasses permanently smudged. She occupied a small office tucked behind the wine cellar, between the walk-in refrigerator and the staff bathroom, because the general manager, a man named Paulson, believed accountants should be heard only when delivering good news and otherwise invisible. Wren had spent 4 years being invisible. She was very good at it. She was auditing a discrepancy in the Tuesday deposit records. $6,000 that appeared, disappeared, and reappeared across 3 ledger lines in a way that suggested either catastrophic bookkeeping error or something considerably worse. When the kitchen door swung open and Paulson appeared, his toupee was slightly sideways, which told Wren everything she needed to know about the severity of the situation before he said a single word. Mr. Shrike's party arrived early, Paulson said, in the specific tone of a man delivering the news that a structural wall had been quietly removed. Wren looked up from her spreadsheet. "That's a front-of-house problem, Paulson." Mireille called in sick. Her replacement is 17 and dropped a bread basket on the alderman last week. He looked at her with the desperate, damp-eyed expression of a man with no remaining options. "You speak French. You've served before. You know the room. I'm an accountant. Your staff, please." He actually said please. Wren had never heard Paulson say please to her before. She saved her spreadsheet, removed her glasses, and stood up. "1 section," she said. "And I'm billing the overtime." She didn't know, pulling on a spare apron in the back corridor, that the private room at the back of Auberge Noire was occupied that evening by 8 men, one of whom was Réal Shrike. Réal Shrike was not, as his tax filings suggested, primarily in commercial real estate. He was, as every federal organized crime unit from Vancouver to Halifax could confirm without quite being able to prove, the operational head of the Saint Laurent syndicate. The most disciplined, most dangerous, and most deliberately invisible criminal organization in the province of Quebec. He was 41 years old, built like a man who treated physical fitness as an extension of professional obligation, and dressed in the kind of dark suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent without looking at. He had a face that was handsome in the way a well-maintained blade is handsome. Precise, cold, and designed entirely for function. He moved through legitimate spaces with the ease of a man who understood that the best camouflage is a good lawyer and a dinner reservation. When Wren pushed through the swing door into the private dining room, Shrike was already seated at the head of the table. He was speaking quietly to the man on his left, a thick-shouldered man named Harlan, who functioned as his primary enforcer and never visibly relaxed. And he did not look up immediately. The table held 8 men. 7 of them were wearing expressions of studied calm that Wren had learned, from 4 years near this restaurant's back room, meant they were being watched and knew it. Wren set down the wine list and the evening menu on the nearest side table. "Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome back to Auberge Noire." She began distributing menus with the composed efficiency of a woman who had been briefly panicked and was now choosing professionalism instead, because professionalism was cheaper than panic. "Can I bring something from the bar while you consider the menu?" Rael Shrike looked up. His gaze moved across her in a single, unhurried pass. Not the way Paulson's glances moved across her, assessing what she represented in terms of inconvenience, but the specific way a careful man catalogues new information. It lasted perhaps 3 seconds. Wren, who had spent her entire adult life becoming fluent in the body language of men who assessed her and found her wanting, waited for the dismissal. The glance downward, the faint tightening around the mouth. It didn't come. "Bordeaux," Shrike said. "Whatever the sommelier considers worth the price of a dishonest markup." There was a half-beat of silence from the table. Wren recognized, in the quality of that silence, that this man did not make casual jokes. She also recognized, with a cold feeling that settled somewhere near her sternum, that he had just made one and aimed it directly at her. She held his gaze. "I'll ask him. He has strong feelings on the subject, so it may take a moment." She paused. "In the meantime, the Côtes du Rhône is genuinely good and priced as though we're embarrassed by how good it is." Another silence, shorter this time. "Bring both," Shrike said. Wren brought both. She took the table's orders with the quiet competence of someone who had not planned to be doing this, and had decided not to let that be visible. The men ordered with the particular confidence of people accustomed to receiving exactly what they asked for. 2 of them spoke to her as though she were part of the furniture. 3 of them didn't look at her at all. Rael Shrike watched her move, not in the way she'd been watched before. The half-contemptuous visual inventory that came with being a large woman in a service position. The assessment that concluded before it really started. He watched her the way a man watches something he hasn't categorized yet and isn't ready to file away. She didn't like it. She liked being invisible. Invisible was safe. She was pouring the second glass of Bordeaux when Harlan leaned toward Shrike and said, in French, low enough that he clearly believed she either couldn't hear or didn't understand. "Boss, she's going to need a different table if the Garneau contingent shows up. They won't sit here with." He made a small gesture in Wren's direction. The gesture covered, economically, her entire physical person. Wren kept pouring. Shrike did not look at Harlan. He looked at the middle distance for a moment, then picked up his wine glass. "The Garneau contingent can eat in the bar," he said at normal volume, "or they can eat somewhere else." Harlan went quiet. Wren finished pouring, set the bottle down with precise care, and said, still in French, "I'll let the kitchen know you're ready for the first course." She was aware, as she walked back through the swing door, that Rael Shrike's gaze followed her the entire way. Behind the closed door of her office, she pressed both palms flat against the desk and breathed. Her heart was doing something inadvisable. She attributed it to the professional risk of the evening rather than to anything else, and went back out to manage the table. She made it through 3 courses without incident. It was during the 4th that things went sideways. The Bordeaux had not been the last bottle, and 2 of the men, Associates Wren, had mentally catalogued as the louder, less disciplined end of the table, had reached the phase of the evening where volume and candor increase in inverse proportion to judgment. The taller of the 2, a man with a signet ring and the complexion of someone who ate too much red meat, watched Wren clear the entree plates and said to the man beside him, in English, clearly audible, "They really will hire anyone these days, won't they? No standards." The table shifted, the kind of shift that happens when people are deciding whether they heard something, whether it counts, whether it's their problem. Wren stacked the last plate, straightened, and looked at the man directly. She had, in 31 years, been on the receiving end of this particular sentiment, expressed in 47 different ways. She had learned that the expression of it said absolutely nothing about her, and a great deal about the speaker. And she had learned not to let it move her face. "Will you be having dessert this evening?" she asked him pleasantly. in the same tone she used to ask everyone this question. The man smirked and opened his mouth. Beaumont. Real Shrike's voice was quiet, the quiet of a room just after something very heavy has been set down on a table. It was not loud. It didn't need to be. You're going to order the tart tatin, and you're going to say thank you, and then you're going to be considerably quieter than you've been for the past hour. Beaumont closed his mouth. He had the expression of a man who had just remembered where he was and who he was sitting with. Tart tatin, he said to Wren, in a voice several registers lower than before. Of course, Wren said. She finished the dessert orders with perfect equanimity and went back through the swing door, where she stood very still for 10 seconds before going to find the pastry cart. She told herself it didn't mean anything. Powerful men silenced subordinates as a matter of habit for their own reasons, and none of those reasons required her to feel anything in particular. She was a number, in this context, a service element, a line item. She told herself that until she almost believed it. The party cleared out at 11:15. Wren reset the private room, confirmed the kitchen totals, and was pulling on her coat in the back corridor when she became aware that she was not alone. She turned. Real Shrike stood in the corridor entrance, coat on, watching her with the same still, unhurried attention he'd leveled at her all evening. Wren looked at him. Mr. Shrike, the front staff can assist you. I know where the front is, he said. His voice was different in the corridor. Smaller room, no audience, the same control, but a different texture. You've been running this establishment's books. It wasn't a question. Wren's chin came up slightly. That's not public information. No, he agreed. But the Tuesday deposit discrepancy has been sitting in Paulson's ledger for 6 weeks, which means either your general manager doesn't know about it, or he's hoping no one looks closely. He tilted his head. Which is it? The cold feeling settled deeper in Wren's chest. Why would you know about a Tuesday deposit discrepancy? Because I have a partial interest in this establishment, and I received a reconciliation summary last month that looked the way lies look when someone isn't quite careful enough. He was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen before on a man in his position. The expression of someone who wants an honest answer and expects to receive one. You found it. 6 weeks ago, Wren said, before she could decide whether to say it. Something shifted almost imperceptibly in his face. And I'm still mapping it. Whoever's running the secondary ledger is good. Not perfect, but good. She stopped herself. I shouldn't be telling you this. No, he agreed. But you did, because you're not the kind of person who can leave an answer unfinished. He let that sit for a moment. Come work for me, Wren stared at him. I'm sorry. I have 3 accountants on staff. One of them is the kind of good that means reliable. 2 of them are the kind of good that means they're making me pay for mistakes they're hiding. He said it with the toneless precision of a man describing a mechanical problem rather than a betrayal. I need someone who can find what I'm paying people to hide. Tonight suggested you're capable of that. Tonight, I served you wine and cleared your plates. Tonight you heard a comment made quietly in French and didn't react with your face, which means you understood it and chose your response strategically rather than emotionally. He picked up his coat from the rack by the corridor door. That's not a waitress skill. That's an analyst skill. Wren was quiet for a long moment. You run a criminal organization. I run several legitimate businesses with complex and interesting financial structures. His expression didn't change. The paperwork is very demanding. Despite herself, against every instinct she had, Wren felt the corner of her mouth move. She controlled it. I'd need a formal contract. You'll have one by Monday morning. She started working for Shrike Enterprises on a Thursday. She told herself it was the salary, which was extraordinary. She told herself it was the intellectual challenge, which was genuine. She did not tell herself anything about the Tuesday morning, when Real Shrike sat down across from her in the glass-walled office on the 14th floor and reviewed her preliminary audit of the secondary accounts, without interrupting her once, without checking his phone, without doing anything except listening to every word she said with the complete, focused attention of someone who considered her competence worthy of his time. She had never, in 31 years, experienced a powerful man listening to her that way. It was profoundly disorienting. She adjusted her glasses and kept talking. She spent 3 weeks inside the financial structure of Shrike Enterprises before she found the second problem. The first problem, the Tuesday deposits, had been a relatively straightforward embezzlement by a mid-level manager named Cleaver, who had been siphoning from the restaurant accounts for 14 months. Wren had presented her findings in a 12-page report. Shrike had read it in her presence, asked 4 precise questions, and thanked her without visible emotion. Cleaver was no longer employed by the following morning. Wren didn't ask what that meant. The second problem was considerably more serious. It lived inside the shell company structure of a holding entity called 9248 Shrike Holdings, and it suggested, to anyone willing to follow the transaction chains far enough back, that someone inside the organization was quietly building a financial parallel structure, a shadow ledger that could, in the event of a certain kind of sudden transition of power, be used to drain the liquid assets of the entire organization within 72 hours. Wren spent 2 days triple-checking before she believed her own conclusions. Then she sat in her office for an hour, because what she was looking at described, in the bloodless language of balance sheets, a plan to rob Real Shrike from the inside, which meant someone currently sitting in these offices, currently trusted with access to these accounts, was planning to take everything from a man who killed people for professional reasons and was known for retaining that particular memory. She could go home. She had enough information and enough distance from the specific components of it that she could reasonably claim she'd missed it. She could close her laptop and have a very clear conscience about the fact that whatever happened was entirely between criminals and had nothing to do with her. She picked up her phone and called Shrike's direct line. "I need 15 minutes, she said when he answered. She got the 15 minutes at 7:30 that evening, in his office on the upper floor. She laid the transaction chains out across his desk in printed form. She'd learned that he preferred paper to screens for anything he needed to hold still long enough to see, and walked him through it without preamble. She watched his face as she talked. She was becoming, she realized, very fluent in the minor vocabulary of his expressions. The specific stillness that meant he was integrating something, the particular quality of attention he gave, information he considered important. He was giving her information very high-quality attention. When she finished, the office was quiet for a long moment. "How long?" he asked. "Conservatively, the structure started building about 8 months ago. The drain mechanism is positioned to activate under 3 conditions." She tapped the relevant page. 2 of those conditions are currently in play. "And the third?" "A specific account authorization code, which I believe rotates monthly and would currently need to be obtained from your primary systems manager." She paused. "Who I believe you may want to speak with." Shrike sat back in his chair. He looked at her for a long moment, with an expression that was not his usual contained attention. Something in it was different, almost careful, as though he was looking at something he hadn't expected to find where he was looking. "How did you find this?" he asked quietly. The rounding errors in the 9248 accounts were consistent in a way that random errors aren't. Consistent errors are a signature. She adjusted her glasses. Someone built this carefully enough that it would survive a routine audit. They weren't accounting for an accountant who reads the way I read. Which is how? Wren considered the question, like I'm looking for a lie. He was quiet for another moment. Then, "I owe you something for this, Wren." It was the first time he'd used her first name. She registered it and did not react, because she had become, in 5 weeks, very practiced at not reacting to Real Shrike. "It's what you're paying me for," she said. "No," he said. "What I'm paying you for is substantially less than what you just did." She gathered her papers and stood to leave. At the door, she stopped, because something had been sitting at the back of her mind for 3 days, and she was never able to leave an unfinished question alone. Shrike. She used his last name without deciding to, the way she did when her brain outpaced her caution. "When you sat across from me in that corridor at the restaurant, you already knew I was the accountant." He looked at her steadily. "Yes. You'd been watching the Tuesday discrepancy because you suspected Paulson. You needed to know whether your instinct about me was right before you made a direct approach." "Yes. You could have called. You have my contact information from the restaurant's employee files. I could have." A pause. "A phone call would have told me whether you were competent. I wanted to know more than that. What did you want to know?" He looked at her with that same careful, unguarded quality she'd caught in his office, the expression of a man who had learned to be precise because imprecision had consequences, but was choosing, now, something less precise. "Whether you were someone worth being honest with." Wren stood in the doorway for a moment. Then she went home. The problem with the systems manager, a quiet, methodical man named Orson, who had worked for Shrike Enterprises for 6 years and who Wren had found, in her 3 weeks in the office, to be unfailingly polite and occasionally offering to bring her coffee, resolved itself over the following 48 hours in ways that Wren did not inquire about and that left her profoundly grateful for the clean accounting principle that knowledge is bounded by scope of work. Orson was no longer in the office by Wednesday. What remained was a destabilized organization and, as Wren learned from Harlan on Thursday morning, a countermove from the people Orson had been working with. A competing syndicate from the east end of the city who had been quietly positioning for the past year to fill a power vacuum they intended to create by dismantling Shrike's financial infrastructure from the inside. When that plan failed, they switched to something less elegant. Wren was working late on Friday. The financial fallout from the Shadow Ledger discovery had created a genuinely fascinating cascade of secondary problems that she found, despite everything, absorbing, when the building's generator kicked on. She looked up. The lights had gone out. The backup lights came up, red-toned and dim, and Wren became aware, in the specific way of someone who pays attention to the texture of silence, that the office floor was too quiet. The stairwell door opened. The 2 men who came through it were not building security, who wore navy and had an air of procedural weariness. These men were the other kind. The kind Wren had learned to recognize in the last 5 weeks as the specific physical grammar of violence as profession. She was on her feet before she had a conscious thought about it. Her laptop went into the credenza. She put the desk between herself and the door and looked at the 2 men, and felt the old, familiar reflex. Make yourself small, make yourself invisible, find the edge of the frame, and then felt something else underneath it, something that had been quietly building for 5 weeks, which was, "No. Miss Bassett," the taller man said, in the careful English of someone working in their second language. "Mr. Valdris would like a word." "Mr. Valdris can call my office line," Wren said. Her voice came out level, which surprised her slightly. "I have standard business hours." The second man moved toward the side of the desk. Wren moved with him, keeping the desk between them, her eyes tracking both. She had 4 years of navigating a restaurant at full service capacity, which meant she understood the physics of a room, where the obstacles were, how much space she actually occupied, how to move her body through a given space without telegraphing the direction. The first man reached for her arm across the desk. Wren grabbed the heavy-based desk lamp, swung it at his wrist with the compact, grounded force of someone who knew exactly where their center of gravity was, and connected solidly enough that he yanked his arm back with a very specific sound. The second man grabbed her from behind, wrapping his arms around her torso, and Ren let him. She took her weight, all of it, and sat down hard, driving them both backward into the glass partition of the conference room wall. The glass did not break cleanly. It came down in a cascade that was extremely loud. The first man was swearing. The second man had lost his grip when they hit the wall. Ren scrambled to her feet, grabbed the credenza handle for balance, and put the credenza itself between her and both men, because the credenza weighed approximately 200 kilograms and was bolted to the floor, and even her current state of pure adrenaline acknowledged this as a reasonable barrier. The stairwell door opened again. Real Shrike came through it at a speed that did not match his usual movement, the contained, deliberate pacing of a man who owns the room he's in. This was different. Harlan was 2 steps behind him, and behind Harlan were 2 more men Ren had seen in the outer offices, and all of them moved into the room with the specific practiced efficiency of people who had done this kind of thing before. It took less time than Ren would have predicted for the 2 men to stop being a functional problem. Shrike came through the credenza side of the room directly to where Ren was standing, and she saw his face for the first time operating outside of its usual architecture. The careful, contained expression stripped back to something that had nothing diplomatic in it at all. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "No." She looked at her right hand, which had a cut from the lamp base. "Mostly no." He took her hand without asking, turned it over, examined the cut with the focused attention he normally gave balance sheets. "You have glass in this, I noticed. Ren." The way he said her name was different from how it had been in the office 3 weeks ago. Quieter. More weight in it. He looked up from her hand, and his eyes were doing the thing she'd stopped being able to categorize. The thing that wasn't assessment, and wasn't distance, and wasn't any of the expressions she'd learned to expect from men who held the kind of power he held. "I had it managed," she said. "I had the credenza between us. I know." A pause. "I saw the camera feed from the stairwell door." Another pause, and she could see in his face what it cost him to say the next part. "I wasn't fast enough to get here before they reached you." She looked at him. He was not a man who apologized for things. She understood, in the specific grammar of everything she'd learned about him in 5 weeks, that what he was doing right now was the closest he knew how to come to it. "You got here," she said. He held her gaze for a long moment. Then, carefully, he let go of her hand. "We need to get that glass out and get you somewhere safe before Harlan and I deal with our guests." "Your guests have information I need from them first," Ren said. "The secondary ledger had a 3rd access node I haven't been able to trace. If Valdris's organization built the structure, someone on their end knows the routing architecture." Shrike stared at her. "You want to interrogate them. I want to ask them specific questions about transaction routing in a context where they have limited incentive to be evasive," Ren said, "which I understand you can arrange." He stared at her for another moment. Then, very quietly, he said, "You are the most singular person I have encountered in 20 years in this business." "I'm an accountant," Ren said. "We finish what we start." She got her answers. It took 40 minutes, and she spent most of them looking at routing codes written on a torn piece of file folder, not at anything else happening in the room, because she was a woman of extremely practical instincts. Afterward, Shrike took her to a private medical contact 3 blocks away, who removed the glass from her hand with professional efficiency and taped it with the air of someone who was paid specifically not to ask questions. They sat in a waiting room the size of a closet while this happened, and neither of them said anything for a while. Then Shrike said, "I owe you an explanation." Ren looked at him. "For what, specifically?" "The reason you have been working in a building that became a target." His jaw was set in the particular way it got, when he was saying something he'd decided to say rather than something that came easily. "What Orson built, the shadow structure, he didn't do it alone. He had support from inside my organization, people I considered trusted, And you, he stopped. I was a new hire, Ren said, not yet calibrated as a risk. They didn't expect you to find it. No. She looked at her bandaged hand. No one expects the accountant. I should have told you the scope of what you were walking into. She considered this. Would it have changed what I found? No. Then it's a procedural failure, not a moral one. She looked at him. I'm not angry with you, Shrike. I'm aware of what this industry is. I made a choice when I took the contract. A pause. I made a choice when I called your direct line instead of going home. He was looking at her with that expression again, the one she'd been failing to categorize for 5 weeks. This close, in this small room, with no desk between them and no professional frame to hang it on, she couldn't pretend she didn't know what it was. I have been running this organization, he said slowly, for 15 years. In 15 years, every person who has sat across from me has wanted something from the position I hold. The money it represents, the protection it offers, the fear it generates. No one has ever. He stopped again, started differently. You told me the books were wrong. That was the first thing you ever said to me, not adjusted for who I was, not framed for what I could do to someone who told me an uncomfortable thing. Just, the books were wrong, and here is why. The books were wrong, Ren said. Yes. A quiet sound that might, in a different man, have been the beginning of a laugh. They were. He turned toward her in the narrow waiting room chair, and there was nothing managed about his expression now. Nothing behind glass. I have been watching you for 5 weeks operate with more integrity and more courage than anyone I pay to have those qualities. And he put it down, simply, without decoration, the way she'd learned he put down true things. I don't know how to be near you without wanting to be better than I am. Ren sat with that for a moment. That's a lot to put on an accountant, she said. I know. She looked at him, this careful, ruthless, contained man who held half a city at arm's length and had just handed her something entirely unshielded. She thought about the corridor at the restaurant, and the Bordeaux, and the way he'd said the Garneau contingent can eat in the bar without raising his voice. She thought about her hand on the lamp base in the dark office, the clean certainty of her own center of gravity. She thought about the fact that she had spent 31 years learning to be invisible and had somehow, in 5 weeks, become entirely visible to this specific person, and that it did not frighten her the way it should. I need you to understand something, she said. I don't adjust. I don't minimize myself to fit a room. I've tried it. It doesn't work, and it's exhausting, and I stopped. I know, he said. It's one of the things I find. A pause. He seemed to be choosing the word with unusual care, clarifying. And if the books are wrong, I'm going to tell you. I would expect nothing less, and I am going to need a significantly revised contract that reflects the actual scope of what I've been doing for 5 weeks, which is substantially more complex than what we originally agreed. This time the quiet sound was definitively a laugh, brief, almost startled as though it had surprised him. Monday morning, he said. First thing. Ren looked at him. He looked back. The waiting room was very small and very quiet, and smelled of antiseptic and old magazines, and none of it was remotely romantic by any conventional standard, and she found she didn't mind at all. All right, she said. He reached over, carefully, and took her unbandaged hand in his. He held it the way he'd held it when he was looking at the cut, with complete, unhurried attention, as though it was something worth taking seriously. He pressed his mouth to her knuckles, quietly, without theatre. The books, Rael Shrike said softly, looking up at her, are going to be very accurate from now on. I have no doubt whatsoever. Ren Bassett, who had spent 4 years invisible in a corner office between a refrigerator and a staff bathroom, looked at the most dangerous man in Montreal and felt, for the first time in a very long time, precisely the exact right size. Good, she said. Now let's go dismantle Valdris before he tries something less elegant next time.